difficulties this morning with our council chambers technology. So I'm going to open us up with a karakia. We're in another room here at council, and then we'll pass over to the new chair of our Assurance Risk and Finance, Te Miromiro, to adjourn until we get that sorted. But I'll open us up with a karakia. Wairei runga, wairei raro, wairei roto, wairei waho, kia tau mai te mauri tū, te mauri oho, te mauri ora, haumi hui e whai ki e, and that hopefully brings a little bit of energy into our chambers so we can fix the technology in there. But hoi no, I te tuatahi e tikana kia tukuna ngā mihi hakatau ki runga I te hia mana hau o tō tātou komiti I tēnei wānau reira e grau mihi nui ana. Haere mai ki te hiku o tika. We, of course, at the start of this training, opted to choose an external chairperson to Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee, understanding the importance of that role and making sure that everything is flowing smoothly for our organisation. And this is your first day with us and first meeting as chair. And I just wanted to extend the words of welcome on behalf of us here at Far North District to our committee, and at least you won't have a boring first day at work story with all this technology playing out. So I'll pass it over to you and you'll be able to adjourn our meeting.
Kia ora, everyone. I can confirm that we have a quorum, and given the circumstances we'll depart from the stated schedule, and I'd like to move that we adjourn this meeting prior to 10 a.m, which is our required start time, to allow technology to be rectified, and then we'll come back online to continue the meeting once we're there. Do I have a mover that we adjourn the meeting until technology is sorted?
Second.
Councillor
And
Deputy Mayor Stratford.
all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. The meeting is now adjourned. Thank you. Welcome back. We haven't mastered the technology issues, so we're in the Mayor's boardroom for those in person, and staff members in general will be teaming in from the chambers. I apologise for any influence that, as a new chair, I might have had on all of this occurring. Murphy is an ancestor, I'm told. So, firstly, I can confirm we've got a quorum, and we'll move through to apologies. We have apologies, I understand, from Councillor Court, Councillor Hilliard Harawira for lateness, Councillor Rakina, Councillor Kappa.
We have them online.
We don't actually have them online, so everyone's.
Yes.
I can't quite read all their names there.
Yes, we've got.
So, okay, so we have no apologies then.
From Councillor.
Oh, Councillor Court, sorry.
I'm happy to move those. Mr. Chair.
Yes, that the apology be received and that Councillor Court have a leave of absence granted for this meeting. So we have it moved, we have it seconded. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, if any? Carried. Do we have any declarations of interest for any matters being discussed today? I'll take it by silence that there are no declarations of interest. I've been advised that there are no deputations. The next item is chair announcements. Just to note that we will do item 6.3 immediately after we have approved the minutes on 5.1. We will then move in the order that the papers were suggested. I'd like to welcome from the auditors, Benny Grayling is in attendance with us. And also we've got Andy Knock from Far North, as he'll be speaking to item 6.3 that we're advancing. I'd just like to note also for the record that I have completed an interest register and filed that with Far North District Council there. Moving on then, if there's no other matters to be raised, I'll take silence as consent with that. We'll move on to the confirmation of the previous minutes, pages 6 to 11 in your papers. Have we got any comment on factual accuracy of those minutes? Perhaps if we just do a page turn, page 1 of the minutes, page 2, page 3, page 4. Do we have someone to move the resolution that Te Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee confirm the minutes of the meeting held 22 February 2023 are true and correct? Councillor Research, second.
Second.
Mayor Mark. Sorry, Terpania. All those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. Are there any matters arising from those minutes that are not covered elsewhere in the papers? I'll take from the silence that there are no matters. We'll then move to item 6.3, which is the Far North Holdings Limited third quarter financial report, pages 121 to 129 in the pack. We've got Andy Knock in attendance, and I'd just perhaps ask Andy to the table to speak on his papers.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mayor and Councillors. I'll take the third quarter report as read. One thing I must start with first is the reason I'm here and not Rob is unfortunately he's had a heart attack and is in hospital. So our thoughts and prayers are with him. So you've got second best today, unfortunately, while we go through this recovery. The third quarter, we are in an advance in terms of where we anticipated being from a financial perspective. As you can imagine, having come out of COVID and taken on board significant changes in terms of general economic conditions and rapidly rising interest rate costs, we were then hit with an added bonus of cyclones and weather. So that's obviously had impact across the business in a variety of sectors. When we look at New Zealand, tourism and the likes of the cruise ship industry. But overall, that's been countered by significant growth in the marina and in our property assets coming on stream, particularly at the Innovation Park Napa, where Tupakanga, the IEC and Regent have all opened up and are now producing income. In addition, we've had good CPI growth across the portfolio, and that's largely helped to offset internal CPI growth in costs. So a bit of a swing across those two sectors, but the market, as you can envisage, has resulted in significant swings across most income and cost centres, purely because of the circumstances we find ourselves in, as many other businesses do across the country. So overall, we're tracking ahead in terms of our dividend forecast. The business is doing very well. Probably the points to highlight are actually in our expenses column, and that's because we've introduced, we've brought on board Optimate in terms of health and safety. And so we've had significant investment in the health and safety element of the business. The great thing about that has been the way that has been taken up by staff in terms of ownership right across the business, because without having that effectively as part of their day-to-day process, then you're not going to achieve the outcomes you're after in the long run. So that's been a real big change in terms of the business and how we operate, and had significant investment in training, workshops, and just that consultancy cost as well. In addition, in terms of our Green Star rating, sustainability, we've got significant investment in those areas as well, with the park aiming to be the first Green Star rated park in New Zealand, and all the sustainability and investment around that Green Star rating. So those are two new areas the business has moved into, which has obviously had costs associated with those. But from our point of view, it's a positive attribution in terms of where we're investing the money. In terms of the other revenue and expenses variations, I'll take those as read, but if there's any specific questions relating to those. In terms of general project update, Corrections is advancing well despite the weather. We had a couple of reasonably good weeks in March, February and March, to actually get some of the earthworks complete. We are likely to incur some additional costs related to those projects having to bring imported fill, because we're going back to another deluge of water coming our way. But the big benefit, or I suppose one of the big outcomes, was actually the resolution around the entrance, which, while there was an agreement to disagree, there was acknowledgement on both sides that it had to go in, simply purely because of the benefit the Innovation Park brought in terms of trades trainings and job opportunities. So that was a really positive outcome, and now we're moving forward Ngāti in terms of our MOU applications going forward. In terms of the RSA, again impacted by weather, Bryn Derwent's closed. So we had costs relating to that in terms of transporting the housing units up to the old RSA site. But again, we're on budget, program despite that, and you'll probably see the first two blocks have now gone up. Third block is about to go up in the next couple of weeks, and we hope to have stage 1 and stage 2 actually having occupants in by the end of October, November. Finally, Merlin Labs, obviously complete. Great to have an autonomous engineering entity at the airport, and to capture that against competition from Christchurch and elsewhere around New Zealand. And reflecting the synergies we get, one of the benefits we've got flowing out of that is they're actually now going to conduct their aeronautical engineering school out of Tupakanga at Waikawe. So straight away we can see the synergies across projects that are starting to evolve, and the added benefits for us starting to see after those investments being made. So if there are any questions pertaining to either project development over that quarter or financial more expenses. I'm happy to take questions.
Happy to open it to the floor for councillors to raise any questions.
Yeah, I've got a couple. Biological assets that show as non-current, is that part of your Green Star rating stuff?
That
Or do you have a lot of
would,
plants?
that would relate to the honey. We
Right.
had investment in honey and hives.
And just going back to the development, the 60 new homes at Tarangi Road and the Dargle, does that show in your asset schedule or something? Or is it,
No.
are you project managing?
That's one where we're actually only at the resource consent stage. So the investment made to date in that is actually the resource consent application
Which part?
and the application to HUD.
The Coco one?
So you're talking about the Mount Fairley? Sorry.
No, it's certainly community housing projects. You've got Coco at Tarangi Road, which is that the our old RSA?
Oh, that's the RSA. Sorry.
So is that an asset of Home Holdings?
That's the asset. So the way that is structured it is it's a joint venture between ourselves and Napoli. And what we've got there is effectively we will own 36 of the units, 1-bedroom units, which are at to the back of the site and towards the right hand side as you look at the RSA. And Napoli, or Clear as we abbreviated, will own 26 of the units. And they're the 2- and 3-bedroom units. So what we've done is effectively we helped secure grant funding on their component.
Yep.
There was not sufficient funding to actually do the whole site, so we've stepped in to build the remaining of the units. We're overseeing the whole development and investment on behalf of HUD, Doon and ourselves. They will own half at the end, we will own half at the end, and they will have the option to buy the other half as and when they're financially capable to do
So you're
so.
project.
So we're enabling it. So yeah, so we're project managing, but initially it will be an investment on our books.
It's not there yet.
No, so it's, like I said, it'll be there by August next year.
Okay. And the Dargle development, Renfrew Street?
Yeah, that's just, so at this stage, just the resource consent application has been launched and HUD application.
That's me.
Councillor Foy, you had a question?
Kia ora koutou, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you. And thank you for that information, Andy. Just looking at the report on page 121 of the report, it outlines the community housing projects, and then, but also the report outlines an increase in operating costs. And purely your team and its capacity to deliver, just in that context of housing. And obviously there's things happening in the space with our council, and the operating costs within your team and the capacity of your team. Do you think that there is that existing capacity, or that you would require additional operating capacity in order to deliver more construction and opportunity in that housing space?
So our team is obviously, we've got a fine balance. We have employees that actually are able to deliver the projects we have, so they work 110%. So if we took on, as we take on additional projects, we take on additional staff. So Adrian Tonks, who you may know, came on board last year when we took on board the extra 2 housing schemes because of the significant investment being made. So we always have to up to, reflecting the project pipeline we have ahead of us.
One question from me, Andy. Thanks for that. Thank you for all the work you're doing. So just thinking about in terms of any impact or risk that we may be facing, this question relating to our sewage capacity and understand what's providing some upfront fund. Right. So can you just comment on that new development and our lack thereof or pipe and sewage capacity? Is that being taken for?
So in terms of the RSA, for example, that was actually lower than the original capacity. So the reason that sent outright was because the RSA had a much capacity than the actual housing units on that site. So it didn't take any additional load to the existing system. In terms of your, which I presume you're referring to, your IAF funding, I think that's critical infrastructure that does need to go in. Otherwise, yes, no other could be built. And we are in discussion. Potential sites need that infrastructure being in place. So we certainly support that IEF infrastructure going in, and we can aid the council in any way. We'd certainly look at how we could do that.
Thank you.
Councillor Radich.
Yeah, thank you. Andy, there is a rumour going around in Kairaia at this very moment that the old Pack and Save, where the old Pack and Save was, that's going to go into housing. Is that correct, or was that just
That's just a good old rumour. We've got absolutely no plans. All we did was demolish the building, which the community wished us to do, to make the site safe, and that's all we've done at this stage. And then obviously we carried out the Kaitaia master planning to identify what could go on the site, and the community clearly identified that not housing, it would be a mixed-use scheme, primarily commercial, health, education, housing, but housing would only be a very, very small component part of that. And so that's what we're going to be working to. At this stage, nothing has been formalised.
all right? And the other thing is, can you give us a report on the mess, and it is a mess, the Kairaia airport? I've been listening to a few people and everything like that. To me, it's irrelevant. Where is Far North Holdings? Where's their stance in regard to this airport at this very moment?
So our stance is we manage that on behalf of council and have done so for a number of years. That when treaty settlement couldn't provide council with a secure long-term lease, ended up being a month-by-month management contract. Council are obviously in a position where they don't wish to invest significant funding without having security of tenure. We are now in a position from our board's perspective is we're carrying significant risk, and our directors are, because we've been asked to manage an airport, but we don't have the investment to actually manage it effectively and in a secure and safe manner. So really, it's council needs security of tenure, and obviously that's what we're pushing for. And then that gives you the ability to invest ratepayers' money into that asset, knowing you've got a long-term lease. Because obviously what you're being asked to do right now potentially is invest significant funds with no security, and it's ratepayers' funds going into an asset which you've got no security over, which is where this has all ended up. And this is purely Lynn's and coming to the table and giving council that tenure.
Right, because I just want to make it quite clear to everyone that the Kairaia airport, and it's important to bring these people into it, is owned by the Erstich family. No one else. They have got the documents, I've seen it, and it is important that when we have our next meeting that they be there. It has nothing to do with iwi. It belongs to the Erstich family, full stop. And I think I mentioned that to you, Andy, not so long ago. But we need to get them involved. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move on. Councillor McNally, you had a further question.
Yeah, just Andy, page 125 of your third paragraph, you refer there to Holdings continues to manage finances prudently. What's your debt situation and debt servicing cover?
So the ratios of the bank we still are operating within those, so it's 1.5 interest cover, and debt equity ratio is currently at about 53.6%.
Just under what you...
Yeah, and both projected, that's taking account of obviously where we are in terms of significant interest rate rises and a significant capital program. So we see those rapidly over the next couple of years moving in a positive fashion up to 65 to 70, and that debt, that interest rate cover also moving up to the +2.5.
So you're just looking at consolidating positions?
So we've just been very, obviously we're well aware of the interest rate impact, particularly when you've got, a $54 million facility. You've got to act in a very prudent fashion. So we're just ensuring that, even investments we're making, we're ensuring we've either got investors in place to take out a significant portion of that when it becomes interest bearing. So we're just taking a very prudent approach and careful approach to future development work.
Thank you. Any further questions? If not, could I ask that someone moves that the Te Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee receives the Far North Holdings Limited third quarter financial report for 2023.
Yeah.
I'll second it.
Councillor McNally, seconded. Councillor Richard. Those in favour?
Aye.
Against, effect? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now return to the agenda and we'll look at item 6.1. And if we can have Julia please come to the table effectively via Zoom or Teams.
Hello.
Welcome, Julia.
Hello.
The papers for this are on pages 12 to 91. I can just hand it over to you to walk through the important facts of your report.
Sure. The pages 12 to 91. So this is the report that we received from our auditors, Deloitte, following the annual report, the completion of their audit on June 2022. The majority of this report has already been reported to the elected members and was briefly discussed at the adoption meeting on the 23rd of March, memory serves me correctly. The additional work that we have done since that meeting is to respond to the points that were raised that you can see on pages, sorry, I'm just flicking through the document.
15 and 15, I think, are the pages you're looking.
I think it was 2C. I remember that was the section. I'm just flicking down. It was the internal control findings. So it's from page 32. And then on page 33, we start with point 1, which was the capitalisation of the property, plant and equipment.
Your response, sorry, Julia, being summarised on pages 14 and 15, which may be a good place as a précis of the report items and your responses and revised responses.
Okay, pages 14 and 15. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm looking at this online. Yes. So the actual point was that a number of assets are not being capitalised after completion of the project. It's caused by a lack of timely communication from the project managers to us in finance. So Deloitte recommended that council adopt procedures to ensure that these were available for you, that the assets that are available for use are capitalised more timely. At the time of the adoption meeting, our response was noted. This is an issue that council will address moving forward. Subsequent to that, our revised management response is that the Far North Waters Alliance reset is aimed at addressing this issue, and we are confident that this matter will be resolved in due course. The second issue was regarding delegated authorities. where it was reported by our auditors that a member of staff supposedly had delegated authority to process invoices up to $5,000, but testing identified that this particular member of staff is able to and has processed invoices with no purchase orders up to the value of $100,000. At the time of the adoption meeting, our response was, whilst the accounts payable officers have delegation to process invoices without a PO, without a purchase order, up to $5,000, they don't process any such invoices. Instead, they are sent to the manager of their section. It's the team leader, financial transaction services. Used to be Marguerite, and that individual processes those invoices without POs. But the accounting payable staff have the delegation to process invoices with a purchase order up to 100,000. So it seemed to us that the information had got a little bit confused between what was advised and what was written down. Since then, we've revised our comment just to say that the accounting payable officers, they can process invoices provided they are accompanied with a purchase order up to $100,000. The actual approval of that invoice has already taken place by those with the financial delegations to approve the PO, not by the accounting payable officers. It's literally just a processing transaction that the accounts payable staff are enacting that's causing the issue here. Hopefully, when Deloitte's come in later this month for their interim audit and conduct their walkthroughs, I'm hoping that this will be ironed out and that it will be made clear that it's literally a processing transaction that the staff are performing. They aren't approving anything. They are literally just approving invoices that have a PO attached to them. The third item is to do with the mileage claims. Sorry?
Focused on the key points. We've also got from Deloitte's, we've got Benny present, and so I do invite Benny.
Yeah, I thought it might just be useful to maybe just close out that point and give some further context as to where the point came from. So as Juno explained, our staff do go through a process of walking a transaction through the system, checking key control points. They also discuss the process with a member of staff, and this was explained to us by the member of staff saying, well, we can actually and have done this before. Now, we've got no way to actually go and verify, have you actually done this in the past or not? So acknowledge the point, and if it sounds like we've just simply been given incomplete or conflicting information, so in a couple of weeks' time, we'll definitely be back onto this and we'll report back specifically on that point to clarify. So, but that's why the point came up.
Chair, I had a question around that. Maybe I can raise it now. If you
yes, if they've got anything on that particular point.
Yeah, it's on that particular point. I noticed the comments being made on both parties. What I was a little bit concerned about is that surely through all of this process, the auditors, Deloitte, should have seen, in fact, the approvals being made and all of that being already tracked. And that was my concern. So whether, from you, Janice, or not, it seems that we could tidy things up so that all of the approvals being made prior are all recorded, so that it's all following through on that process.
Through the chair, I can respond to that point. All of our approvals are electronic. They are workflowed within the system.
Yes.
And we can get audit reports on any document that's been processed that tells you who's touched it at what point that it goes through the system.
Thank you. And that's then like made available for the auditors to look at.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, they can.
Thank you.
Deputy Mayor?
Yes, so what I'm hearing though, whilst we have a process that is adhered to, there is an ability for somebody to process a transaction without a purchase order.
Through the chair, we
Up to the
do,
value of
we
100K.
do process up to 100, well, we process invoices without purchase orders. And some of them, like electricity bills and things like that, we would never have a purchase order for because they're too complex
To the
to.
value. and
They
then
can
quite
be higher than that, but they are approved and put through the process by people with the DFA that then report back to the accounts payable officer that they're okay to pay. I'm not aware of any instance where the AP officer can actually process an invoice without a purchase order of that value.
So that
Councillor McNally?
just brings me, the question I had was, so who has the financial delegation and what are the dollar amounts per delegation, per senior management or whoever might get that have that delegate authority? Doesn't have to happen now, but I'd like it reported sometime.
So maybe we
We-
take it through to the next meeting to bring through the delegation's policy and limits in the papers. I've just a comment that I had noted that understanding that the next audit was due to be underway was to await Deloitte's view, noting that they will be presumably having a much deeper look into this due to the new ISA 315 requirements, which is me getting a little geeky for a moment.
I did read that.
Did it put you to sleep? So
Very good for insomnia.
yeah, so the new standard does require the auditors to look more deeply into these matters than they did under the standards that applied in the last audit. So I'm expecting to see more detailed findings and work being done in this area. So I think maybe we leave the validation of this item and also probably item number 4 with Deloitte to be reporting back on. And I presume, Benny, you will be giving an interim management letter.
Yeah, we will.
What would be your expected timing of that letter? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
No, that's okay. It's our interim testing starts sort of between now and year end. So I'd be expecting somewhere around mid-June, we'll be issuing a planning report saying that we've done our interim testing. This is the audit plan. This is preliminary findings. If any given update on some of these things, provided testing of course is complete, and title it to the audit committee.
Yes, I think our next scheduled meeting is in August at this stage.
Yeah, we can distribute the report. We don't have to wait
Yeah.
for specific.
It can come to the council
Yeah,
and be
no,
distributed.
we do it as a matter of.
Yes.
We can distribute those under briefing papers if it comes in between meetings.
Excellent. Now, Councillor Foy, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just in regard to number 5 in the table, being provision of doubtful debts. In the actual council meeting, Deloitte detailed, I think, the actual value of that. And I think off memory, it was $1.5 million of doubtful debt in the last financial year. I just want to clarify the amount. And number 2, I've put in a request for information from staff about the amount of rates that aren't paid from Māori land, because we know that you can't sell Māori land or.
They will have a point of order, Councillor Foy.
not relevant to this report.
The number 5, doubtful debt. In the Deloitte report.
It's the recommendation from the auditors is that management review actual collection and recoveries and the provisioning policy. I think I saw that the total involved was $1.5 million. the management are coming back with the rates remissions there, and we do have schedules elsewhere in the paper analysing the recoveries. I believe it's about pay. It's later in this report. Julia may well be able to point us to it. Does that not answer your question that you were raising about the breakup of the overdue amounts?
I think it's less about the overdue amounts and the reason why we're getting the overdue amounts, because under the Rating Act, we create remissions policies, but there's certain properties that will be rating that we're never going to get the money from. So I'm not sure the cost internally.
This is council policy, is it not, rather than audit and risk committee business? And with all councillors on the audit and risk committee, there is a danger that we sort of can stray into the council's domain. This, I believe, may well be a question that should be raised in the council gambit as opposed to the audit and risk.
So I should do a notice of motion for a question.
I'd need to talk to my governance advisor.
Janice has something to add.
Janice, you have something
Through
to
the
add?
chair, I think at the last meeting, and I'll let Benny speak to this in a moment, it's a matter of interpretation around how we are calculating our provision. We certainly have a much higher provision for married freehold land than we have for general title rates. But again, it's an interpretation issue between how we look at the standards. I'm confident that what we're doing is correct, but equally Benny's team have got a slightly different view to us. And it was clearly identified as an interpretation issue, not a failure in our process.
Yeah, thank you. So that, again, context to that is council does the ratings, records it, it goes and sits on the balance sheet as a receivable, which effectively represents potential future cash collections. Council follows policy correctly, and it sets a policy with whatever reason, follows that, which makes perfect sense. You apply the accounting standards to the actual receivable that sits on the balance sheet. The accounting standard basically says you have to estimate how much of that amount you're actually going to collect in cash in future. If any part of that amount that sits there becomes overdue, it's an indication that you may not potentially collect the full amount in cash, right? And on that basis, you should then make a provision for accounting purposes. Council's done that. We then go as the auditors, so how can we test whether the accuracy of this provision? And we perform a stress test, an audit test, by looking at historically when debt or invoices sit in a particular bucket, so depending on how old they are. What is the collection rates historically, the cash collection rates that have come in over time? It is our test. And then we say, well, based on that, we recalculate what we think the maximum, or if you like, the provision should be, and it comes out to a certain amount. Compare that to what council's recorded in the accounts, under the accounting standards, under its own policy, which has been correctly applied, and we say there's a difference of 1.5. Now that 1.5 does not necessarily present an actual overdue or doubtful debt that you can point to a particular individual or whatever, saying it's based on a collective assessment, based on our judgment versus council's judgment, which is, so I want to make that, that's why we refer to it as a judgmental difference in this case. Hopefully that physical.
It comes up in item 7.
Yes,
as well.
Yeah. And we the reason we have to raise that on that schedule is because we have to illustrate what the potential impact on the annual report would be, numbers wise, if council were to make a further adjustment. Conclude at the end of the day that it's not a material issue from an audit perspective. That's why we signed a clean audit opinion. on the provision that council has actually put.
I may, from the chair, say that your analysis of the accounting standards IAS 36 is spot on from a technical point of view, and the object of the audit is to ensure that they are comfortable that they do not believe there is evidence that there is a material misstatement within the accounts. That does not mean to say the accounts are actually correct and totally accurate. These are matters of judgment. I align it to there will be a difference between the actual when time goes on and what was estimated. So that's to be critical of a judgment unless it's fundamentally incorrect is a bit like being critical of someone on Thursday not knowing what Saturday night's lotto numbers are going to be on Monday morning. Yes, there's no certainty in it at all.
Yes.
So we had a question from Deputy Mayor. Is that still a relevant question?
You covered it all. Greg's on the
Thank you. And anyway, we've managed to jump out of order on Julia. My apologies for allowing that to happen. You were talking on the mileage claims, I think, when we ended up getting diverted.
Yes. For the sake of reading through each of the items, would it perhaps be better if I open the floor up to questions rather than going through each point individually?
Happy to do so. If the councillors have any particular questions. My own thought on number 4 was that the Boys are about to do their interim, and that probably we just await that. The management's noted that they believe they've addressed it. We have the timing of the recognition of the Kaikoui Water Company. That will be a carry forward item where I believe the council's getting advice. Is there any update on that advice, Julia, if I may ask?
I'll take that. Chair, we have with PwC Technical this afternoon for them to actually prepare a paper and advise us on their view of our accounting treatment for those.
Okay. What timing is that, just out of interest?
This afternoon,
3 o'clock, 3:30.
Okay, might be marginal. I just thought that might be an interesting one with my background to potentially sit in on, but it might be a wee bit tight.
Yeah, I can just briefly comment on that one. The issue there in our view was the actual agreements that gave entitlement to the shares. Again, when you apply the accounting rules as to when control actually vests, it happened post balance date.
Yeah.
That's
and it comes down to whether in fact there was a moral and effective agreement pre. And that I don't know the facts, and I won't pass any comment on my views. We'll leave that one through. There's no doubt that one's going to be resolved. Is that matter significant enough that it would result in a prior period adjustment?
No, it wouldn't at all. And the agreements we looked at, I would expect it to be okay to be in June 2023 anyway. The transaction this is a 2023 transaction, so not a prior period adjustment.
But through the chair, we just want to be clear that our accounting treatment is correct because there is potential for this to continue with further shares.
Yes.
Going forward, so we just need to be sure that the way we're treating it is correct.
Yeah.
And potential step acquisition questions.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, so my questions relate to 4 and 6, and probably 4, 5 and 6. And it's simply, what's the impact on the annual plan, long-term plan, debt to equity, lending ceiling? Because there's obviously an income and an asset affects both the balance sheet and the income. All of those.
Well, no material impact because if it's not, when we look at the annual plan, we also apply materiality threshold. Be similar to this, so it wouldn't have a material impact. The reason why we raised the audit trail around the vested assets, making it from the work in progress account into the actual asset itself, it's a housekeeping thing to make sure that the depreciation starts accruing. When the asset is actually used, but the assets do get revalued quite frequently. So the impact of that is going to be material.
Apparently, Councillor McNair, my understanding is there's plenty of room in the covenants, so an adjustment such as this is probably not an issue. Looking forward with the forecast Three Waters work, that may well become more important to the view of the accounts and covenants compliance in future years, especially with the delay that's been mooted of the Three Waters project.
Yes.
By government in the last couple of weeks or so.
Yeah, and probably on point 5, there's management response quite correctly points out the impact of IPSAS 41. Without boring you too much, IPSAS 41 is basically an accounting standard that applies a similar sort of test in setting the provisioning policy than what we already do. So my expectations is once you do apply that sort of test, we're going to get to that very similar answer already.
The matter will resolve itself.
Yeah. And the last question I have on those couple of pages is on 3, the mileage claims. I just noticed that Deloitte recommendation that the employee agreements and compliance with the employment agreements and meet various employment tax legislation requirements, which related to basically the tax-free portion.
Yeah.
Where the mileage and non-taxable items were added into the equation, and it sounds like gross income mileage allowance was deducted due to net income. I just thought that's probably quite a good benefit to someone on a high income.
Yeah, so again, if I may, it's background to this is employees are entitled to submit a reimbursed claim at 28 cents a kilometre.
Yeah.
I need to make this quite clear that this is a tax adjustment. This is not a payment of an allowance. And this is a conversation that we've had with the auditors. So this is a special IRD treatment for this area because we do not have public transport. So all staff have to drive to work. So
it meets the legislation.
So it meets the legislation, and we have documentation back to pre-2003 that says it does. We use extremely low rates to calculate this. We do not use the IRD mileage rates, which are 70 something odd cents a kilometre.
83.
We're using 28 cents a kilometre to calculate this tax-free adjustment. So all it does is it calculates a value that is taken from gross earnings, tax is applied, it's added back. This is not a payment of an allowance.
So we're comfortable with legislative compliance. We're also comfortable this is not material to the overall financial statements, and that we're not actually got a significant risk.
The only place that this affects is in the employee's taxable amount.
Yeah.
It's not anything that affects the books of council. We've also got the PwC tax team are reviewing this, and they review it as part of their compliance audit that they're currently carrying out.
So again, a future meeting will highlight any issues.
Yeah.
So sorry, I've just got Felicity, I think, had another question, Benny. Sorry.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I don't know if it's a question for Julia. I just don't understand the answer about the doubtful debt question in relation to cash flows, because that's a 1.5%, of operational cost is $1.5 million. In terms of our budgeting, if we're not actually going to be collecting it, and we had $30 million of rates arrears which were written off with the new government policy about unused Māori land. So is it 1.5 million that we're not collecting every year? How does this work? Or we are going to collect the $1.5 million, but the following year, or we write off $1.5 million of debt because we don't collect it?
Maybe I can clarify that the provision that is made against uncollectibles using the best available evidence as to adjusting the debtors outstanding to what we believe we are going to see in cash coming forward in the future, potentially with an indexation of CPI if you really get technical. But so this is not anything about cash provision. But it is arguably reducing, making allowance for a reduction in future cash flows.
You could look at it as a sort of a quantification of a risk, as such. Not, it's a risk, potential risk adjustment, if you want.
Councillor Cupper, you have a question?
And just to follow on from Councillor Foy, is that risk identifying Māori as the risk?
No, not specifically. I can answer from accounting standards point of view. It is actually using stratification of the population to lead to your best estimate of what the final outcome is being. It's not targeting any particular sector at all. So this is really arising from government policy.
Thank you very much, because I'd really like to get some clarity around that, because I'm aware that Councillor Foy has brought this up many a time, and some within the public arena, and Māori are becoming concerned that they are targeted as being the non-contributors. Thank you.
I think that's an invalid conclusion. It's about stratification from an accounting sense, and this is an impact of government policy and wording. It's not anything to do with the local people or this council. It's much greater than that. Moving on, if we may, are there any final questions?
For the entire report or just those couple of pages?
For those couple of pages. Deputy Mayor.
I just want to acknowledge that we've got the previous audit report in this, which I always find quite helpful to look back at, noting what Deloitte had identified. Actually, some of that is in the previous year's report, and I look forward to the interim, because otherwise we don't, I don't have that assurance that it's actually getting addressed. And we've, over the last 5 years, we've been repeatedly seeing the same ones in those traffic light reports.
If I may comment, one of my projects is to go through and benchmark your processes against other audit and risk committees that I'm on to identify gaps. What's very useful is to have a schedule of all the past findings there with their severity rated by the auditors, and then we internally place a severity rating, and that we have a standing paper that will trace these through, where we can monitor what's been cleared, and then they drop off at the next meeting, so that we get a very clear trail for councillors as to where the status of all these items, and also the status of past minutes and resolutions and action points is sitting, so nothing drops off the radar with unless we actually decide it's going to drop off.
Love it.
So perhaps just it's a little project before the August meeting that I wish to do and benchmark and develop also a work plan, so that councillors know at which meeting items are going to come up, and staff can be prepared and have good notices about what the expectations will be of this committee for staff. So
That may cover off a series of questions I had relating to Appendix 1 from 75 to 86.
yes, so perhaps if I could suggest we take a rain check on that, because coming out of this, there may be some task for management to go trawling back through past reports and work out which points are still outstanding.
Yeah, well, some of my comments, has this been done? Update, please. Not seen any of this. Just
In the interest of time, maybe I suggest that we just
given we've
carry that,
late. Yep.
carry that forward.
Last one, was this completed?
Yeah, so it's useful to have that, and I can provide some examples from other councils to assist staff. Yes.
I'm comfortable.
Are there any further questions or points, Julia, you wish to raise, or questions from council?
No, thank you. Unless there are further questions from yourselves.
No, I'm happy to move forward.
Thank you.
Do I have someone that will move that Te Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee accept the management response to the findings identified by Deloitte? Do I have someone to move? John?
Second.
Carmen.
Yes, I'm afraid my glasses aren't quite good enough at this range. Councillor Klistovich, seconding. All those in favour? Against, if any? Carried.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Julia. You can stand down now from table.
Thank you.
No, I'll have you there for this report item 6.2. That's pages 92 to 120.
He's already left the building.
Hello.
Oh,
Okay.
just before you start, I've just had a point of clarification on the apologies. Councillor Halkyard Harawira has formally tendered a apology. She too has had technical problems joining in on the meeting. So my good friend Murphy seems to be playing havoc today with things. So if it is caused by that distant relative of mine, my apologies. Submitted. So Julia, pages 92 for the committee members to 120. It's the council financial report.
I'm actually going to hand this over to my manager, Angie Thomas, with regards to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome, Angie.
Morena. So for the council financial report, this report is at the end of March, where the commentaries have been updated where required. In terms of financial performance, we have a net operating position of 7.9 year to date, to which that is 64%. In terms of our year to date total income, it is behind by 5.5 mil, mainly due to water by metre, which is down due to low consumption across the district. And another one probably would be the unsealed road metalling for renewals. They're sitting at about 1.9. In terms of our operational expenses, we're also currently behind by 2.4, mainly due to, again, use of our consultants in terms of resource consents and also contractor fees, which has been impacted due to the weather events throughout the year. In terms of our capital expenditure, this is still challenging in terms of delivering on our program, which we see we are 17.1 mil behind. There has been a bit of a review in terms of this, which we've been working with one of our GMs, which will be flowing through to our annual plan, which the elected members will be receiving updates from. In terms of our borrowing investments, we are in a good position. We do have a banking facility of 20 mil, which we have a current drawdown of 14 mil, which has been repaid and has been renewed for May. So any questions?
Any questions from the councillors?
Yeah.
Councillor McNally.
Yeah, just fees and charges. I was a bit disturbed to see reasons consent behind budget, because we had to refund $663,000 for not meeting statutory timeframes. The other question, central government subsidies. That's on the bottom of page 99. New works, and it refers to the Waipapa Sports Hub and the Te Hiku development. Income has not been claimed for both. Why is that provincial growth fund or that project funding referred to as income? I would have thought it was capital.
In accounting terms, if I may step in, it might be capital in nature, but under accounting standards, it needs to be recorded as income, because it's effectively assisting us in increasing our asset base.
So that income then becomes depreciable?
Well, it becomes a capital asset, which is depreciated, yes. I think we had a question from Councillor Foy.
Thank you, and thank you for that information, Angie. I guess for me, I don't know if it's a question for your department or the resource consents department, because our council, for some reason, we issue the decisions without asking for or issuing the invoice to be paid first, whereas the other councils that I'm aware actually ask for the invoice to be paid before the decision is sent out to them. And we have a huge amount of debt outstanding for a number of years because of that. I think there was about even one consent with 200,000 owing that I've been made aware of. Do you have a response in terms of risk, financial risk to our council, and why operationally we do that with our resource consents as compared to building consents? We have to pay before you get your building consent.
We may have a response from Janice.
I just want to say, similar to the previous point, this will be picked up in the revenue recovery report later on the agenda, because the accounting is slightly different in terms of how we record income in the accounts versus cash. So that will be dealt with in the revenue recovery report.
Are you happy to just wait and see if your question's answered, Councillor Foy, in that report?
Yeah, as long as there's a staff member like Andrew or someone else that can answer it, yeah.
Yeah, we'll perhaps deal with that where in the revenue reports. Any other questions, Councillor McNally?
Yeah. When on page 100, it refers to central government subsidies and renewals. It says program of works behind schedule by 1.9 million. So I understand, gear was shifted, but what's the compounding cost of this? How do we allow for that? This is our deferred maintenance problem. So that was one. I've got it goes on. I could do go on, but we'll deal with them one at a time, shall we?
Andrew, are you in a position to give an answer to Councillor McNally's?
Not at this time, but if Councillor McNally, if you could forward all your points, I can readdress them on an individual basis.
Yeah, because there's another one there relates to the treatment Monument Hill. What's the actual cost?
One of the things, if I might say, at year end is to look at your carry forwards through that through into next year to make sure that the reserves amounts, etc., are correctly handled. I was going to pass a comment that you are not alone in two areas. One is that capital expenditure is not coming through on the schedule that was originally envisaged, and this is an endemic across all councils that I'm involved in. And I see our auditors nodding his heads that runs through. The learning from this, I think, is actually important to think in as you go into the next LTP shortly after this next audit is completed, is thinking about your phasing of work in the world that we now live in, which is resource constrained there, and the ability to get sufficient resources and supply line issues needs to be thought about. And it seems to be myself and a number of others were counselling a number of councils that we've been involved with as independents, saying you need to look at this, that we could see it coming. And most councils said, no, we've always been able to do it that way. So I guess learn from the experience and feed this into your planning process. I'm sure management will be in what they are bringing forward, and I'm seeing nodding heads.
I think through the chair, it's just for the other councillors and the staff, it's just the things that I'm seeing here is like the wastewater contractor fees, 3.4 million increase, and that's talking storm events, road network contract management fees, over budget 2.5. We need to review how these things are delivered and how they are monitored on a monthly basis. Maintenance works, 11.6 ongoing across the road network, status update, that transport committee stuff. There's delays, and one of the comments on page 102, urban stormwater under budget, costs are mainly reactive or unplanned. These budgets are fully committed to what? There's a whole lot of money committed, but there's no explanation of what they're committed to. I'll send it to Angie, but
Yeah.
I think if the balance of the councillors actually read all these and just highlight where it says unsubsidised, unbudgeted, approval needed, we need monitor and review. We've got to be much firmer on monitoring and reviewing. Stormwater projects behind budget, wastewater behind budget. It just goes on, unbudgeted.
Yeah.
Under budget.
If you send those questions through to Angie as offered, and then we can perhaps then have a look at this. Well, it may be something we need to workshop through to actually look at the answers and there. We've got a further comment I'd just like to make from the chair before we go to the couple of questions that are out there. I'm seeing other councils with not being able to meet statutory deadlines and having to provide refunds to customers. The resource planning consenting area is very short-staffed, and it hasn't been helped by other government departments being formed and coming along and stealing the good people out of the councils. So that's just simply a lack of resource for all that's going on in the country at the moment. The other thing is that it's useful to look at the wages cost and the consenting area added together, the contractor costs, and look at those, because there's a natural offset between the two to try and overcome some of the resource consenting. So looking together at those two numbers combined is often a useful way to understand. Now, we've got questions, I believe, I can't see on the screen now, it's disappeared. I think, Angie, you had a comment from a staff perspective, and we had some councillor comments also.
Yep, I was just going to make a comment in terms of Councillor McNally. We totally agree that we need to look at what we're reporting, and we are working as an organisation to move forward with this so you get better results. Thank you.
I think Deputy Mayor, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, so looking at this financial report and considering that we're going to be heading into our annual plan and setting of rates, like from the report, I see, we're down in some income from rates, mainly water, but then you look at the next report we're going to talk about, and, there is a bit of slip. I'm wondering if it's time for a Brad Olsen report or presentation to our council on the state of the economy, and whether we need to do that by a resolution to get that, Janice, or so that's what I wanted to raise. We have in previous chair had an economic, what's it called?
Yep.
Just as
Bancorp or someone like that.
Brad Olsen does it from Infometrics,
Infometrics.
an economic update for what they're seeing. And we've been doing that regularly since COVID, purely because the metrics that they use for economic measurements have all kind of been decimated with the way the world's reacted post-COVID. So
now we're getting into that big R. Don't want to say it out loud. I think we need to, have some board.
We can certainly make
contact. Can I potentially take this offline, because I have some suggestions from other councils about the handling of this and potential thoughts. So I'm happy perhaps just to workshop this offline.
Okay.
I certainly have some thoughts in that area there, and also tying in your debt covenants and your LGFA and funding profile and all of those sorts of areas. But I need more information before I probably say too much. On the screen, I can't see whether there's any outstanding questions necessarily. Is there, Felicity, have you got one?
Yeah, it was, I think it may have been partially addressed, thank you, from Councillor McNally, just about the way that the information is reported. Like, for example, about the income and the statement above it, it excludes general rates and rates penalties. The way that we're reported directly relates to how we might change our differentials, for example, and have more targeted rates versus more general rates, and how we actually implement that going forward. So What I see from previous years is that our capital works, we have a ginormous amount of carry forwards. And because we don't have it reported to us, we get huge surprises like our key asset management data, our key asset management process. I don't know what happened for years and years and years because we put all this money into doing this project and there was no reporting back to us. So I think this is a key risk for us as councillors, and I'm not sure how other councils have this information presented, but it's shown that the governance think that things are being done in terms of the capital works program, and we find out a whole year or even years later it's not. And the only thing I can see as the key risk is what we're being reported or not, and how that relates to our income, and also how if we separate that capital works for what Councillor McNally has presented in terms of grants, like the PGF, actually as part of our reporting we should have the roading subsidy, the FAR rate, as a separate amount, because that's not our cash flow, that's from central government, not paid out rates. So I'd just like to highlight that.
Thank you for that. As I said, I'm planning on going through your papers and comparing that against other councils to ensure that we're perhaps getting some more visibility coming up through this committee on some of these risk areas. So it's a little project for me in between meetings. Any other questions on this particular paper? Mayor.
Mr. Chair, just a little bit of a question around on page 102, our community board grants being over budget by 366,000.
Angie, have you got any comments?
Just on our community boards debt with have set budgets in terms of placemaking and community grant funds. So I wonder how they are able to grow over budget unless they are being allowed to tap into their next year's sort of allocation before the financial year rolls over or something like that. I just don't know how it's possible.
Would you have that detail at your fingertips, or will you need to come back to the Mayor on that question?
I'll come back to you on that one because we sort of lost the question in between the video.
Sorry, just page 102, Angie.
Yeah.
Community grants are over budget by $366,000. That's quite significant given the total amount of community grant funding our 3 community boards have.
Okay. I'll come back to you.
Take that one offline. Any other points to raise, or shall I ask for someone to move?
I just want clarification on pages. It refers to unbudgeted expenditure.
Pages
108 to 10, I think it is.
Yes.
And I'm just struggling to work out whether the 11.1 million just relates to unbudgeted roading, or that's total. We've got unbudgeted roading, but unbudgeted capital works and unbudgeted operational, and that all adds up to something like about 1.4. Sorry.
I think that's the total of
14 million, not 1.4, 14 million.
8.4, 1.9. And I think that's the grand total you're referring to, 11.111 million.
So that refer under that it starts, the whole thing is unbudgeted expenditure. These are additional works not included in the original budget for the current year. Unbudgeted more than 100,000 must be approved by council. Anything less, I know there's a couple there that I've been involved with approving, such as the Turner Centre flood risk mitigation. The rest of them I'm not too sure. It's a lot of money.
Yes, there was the former council up until October there before you came on board. I suspect is the answer.
Mr. Chair, there has been a request around the table to actually get a report of the budget, the detail of budget expenses. It might be useful to get that.
We can perhaps take that forward into thoughts for the work programme.
I guess
Regular
just-
reporting.
I guess just drops into our annual plan for next year's budget. How is it impacted? Is this already committed money? And then the next few pages I've just highlighted, it's various renewals budget from 23, 24, 22, 23. So there's a whole lot of forward planning and the long-term plan being dragged back into this current year. It appears.
Again, Angie, perhaps you might want to give some thought to that and some clarification back to the councillors. I'll now move item 6.2 that the Te Miromiro Assurance, Risk and Finance Committee receives the council financial report for the period ended 31 March 2023. I've moved, so do I have a seconder? Thank you, Deputy Mayor. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, if any? Carried. Next item on the agenda is 7.1, which is the mayoral discretionary fund. And it's pages 130 to 131.
I have about 40 questions on this. It's 7 pages.
35 items. I'm happy to move.
I'm happy to second.
Okay, we
No questions.
have moved and seconded the report that the Te Miromiro Assurance, Risk and Finance Committee received the report mayoral discretionary fund. It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Just a comment. It makes remove due to privacy. I'm not sure that that is correct. But, maybe start.
So we, working on comment on
Yes,
this.
certainly.
Chairman, we had, so for the past 3 years, we actually haven't been following our own policy and reporting on the mayor's discretionary fund, which we fixed up this term round. So the first Te Miromiro committee meeting that we had included constituents' names in there, and then it was picked up that we needed to be respectful of the Privacy Act, and also that for some of the applicants to our mayoral discretionary fund, there are sensitivities around the reasons why they need to apply to us for some assistance there. So I think our legal team said that we make sure that we remove names in that space to protect their privacy. Which is why we're seeing it like this here. We have had, though, at our recent catch-up, Kelly, we had. Sorry, anyway, for some of our organisations, their names can actually be displayed.
Yeah, organisation names.
Not private.
Yeah, not private constituents.
Yeah.
So that will be rectified for the next one.
Yeah, my understanding is that it's only personal information. Organisational names can be disclosed. The alternative, if it is important, we can always move into PX, but I think it's best to have most things in the public arena, noting that and acknowledging that individuals' rights to privacy are in place and are governed by statute, which we must follow.
If I could just note that I think that we would probably see a lot more applications and probably smaller amounts to share out the small amount, total amount of that the fund has. But because we have been fortunate to receive so much mayoral relief funding after Cyclone Gabrielle, that some of those applications have managed to be put across to that fund, which is why we're probably seeing a little bit of leeway in what we've been able to use our discretionary fund.
Right. Noted. Any other questions or comments before I place the motion? Councillor Rakina.
Kia ora, just a pātai around reporting for the fund that's given out to these groups as well. Does the is there any reporting from the groups that receive the funding that come back to council so that we're able to see that it has been well spent? I'm pretty sure that this would be a process for many of our organisations or kaupapa. Kia ora.
Off the top of my head, if I can, Chair McGlynn and staff might want to pop in here to correct me, but there is a requirement for either receipts to be given and a report on the actual spend itself to come through to us, just like there is for our community board.
Can I ask that those be added to any future funds that are given out?
Yeah, we'll tidy up on that right now. There's the Miromiro discretionary fund is being this report is compiled by our executive assistant. If we're going to start looking at bringing those reports to this table as well, which I'm not sure the policy stipulates needs to happen, we might have to have a conversation with our funding advisors to help start.
I believe from an audit and risk point of view, just knowing that the process is correct, it is being looked at and it has been implemented, we shouldn't be getting into minutiae of individual reports or anything like that. It's knowing about the process, which I think is the point that Councillor Rakina was raising. Have we got a process to make sure the funds were spent for the correct purpose? And my understanding coming from the comment is that we believe that there is, and I have nodding staff heads are nodding, and so therefore we've got an accountability loop. The amounts involved are relatively immaterial, as you can see, so we shouldn't be spending too much time doing that. It's actually just having the comfort the process is appropriate and is being actioned. So to that point, we have a motion that has been moved and seconded. Could I put the motion that the Te Miromiro Assurance Risk and Finance Committee receives the report on the Miromiro Discretionary Fund? All those in favour? Against, if any? Carried. Item 7.2 on pages 132 to 136 is the revenue recovery report, and Janice, will you be speaking to that one? No.
Marguerite.
Oh, Marguerite, welcome to the table.
Kia ora.
So leave it up for you to make any comments or key points that you wish to make.
Thank you. So the report is based on the data as at the 31st of March. In terms of general title rates, we collected 27% reduced. It was 27% reduced since the start of the rating year. For the rates for water, 46%. For Māori freehold land, the rates were reduced by 3.93% and water by 3.79%. From the rates perspective, the larger percentage of that was due to write-offs as part of the Whenua Māori Amendment Act. This was either due to non-rateable land, and there was some for CE write-off as well. Overall, I just wanted to mention that overall, if we look at it from a year-on-year perspective, the current rating year and the rates arrears collections are down by 2.5%. I know it's only a very small amount, but I did want to mention that. Now, the challenge is for us to look back on the previous year, which is something what we normally do, is a bit of checking apples against pears because of COVID. So the status last year was very different to what it is this year. We have had some staff shortages, and our mortgage demand process actually started much later this year than it did last year. So Last year, this time, we had already collected $780,000 for mortgage demand. This year, we're at 500,000. So we're a little bit behind the curve, but we're ready to move forward. So as you can see from the report, we issued final demand last week to other financial institutions, and this week we'll be starting with the major banks, and they will be done week on week per bank, so that we basically stretch out the time needed for staff to manage any calls from the members of the public. In terms of the debtor's debt, with regards to the resource consent, I am happy to give some more information to you. So with regards to resource consent, so this is the process is indeed different from our building consent. So building consent, we will not issue building consent unless payment is made up front. With resource consents is different. A legal opinion was received, and I believe that was about a year or two ago. The legal opinion was given externally, and we were told at that time that we were not allowed to change the process, that if we were to request payment before we issued consent, the clock would not start on that 20-day time limit. We need to issue the consent. Therefore, if we asked for payment up front, the clock would still continue to tick, and we would be outside our time limit. That was the legal opinion we were given at the time. It would definitely make it a lot easier for myself and my staff to be able to collect the debt. The only other option we have then is we do look at resource consent very quickly. So teams are aware that as soon as an invoice for resource consent hits past the 30 days, we contact the owners straight away, or the person that's requested the resource consent. What we are finding on a large amount of resource consent is that these debtors immediately submit an objection, which they're legally entitled to. The objection, the only way that this is then managed is the objection has to go back to our resource consents team to review the objection. Most of the objections are in terms of the cost applied to that resource consent. As you understand, obviously, the resource consent team are already challenged with dealing with the resource consent that it is. So this then creates another flow of work coming through to them. There is generally a reasonable amount of delay before the review can be done. Sometimes customers will continue to object. The only other option for us then is to actually push it through for it to be reviewed by an external commissioner. An external commissioner generally only comes up to the far north, I believe, once a month or once every 2 months. So again, another delay. And if that's not resolved, then the only other option would be legal proceedings. Legal proceedings very much, we look at the actual value of the invoice and the cost of issuing legal proceedings. It has to work for us, really. And the only thing I think I would like to mention is that unfortunately, because our application fees for resource consents, they are actually much lower in percentile to the true cost of a resource consent. And that means that there's always going to be a reasonable sum to be paid at time when the resource consent has been issued. I hope that gives you enough information, but please do feel free to ask any questions and on everything else, of course.
Do you have any questions? Councillor Foy?
Thank you, Marguerite, for that answering my question before. However, I don't know who gave you that legal opinion, but Auckland Council, for example, you have to pay your resource consent fees before your decision is issued, and we're much smaller than Auckland,
yes.
So I'm not sure why that legal opinion didn't look at other case study risk examples. And I mean, $200,000 for one consent. I haven't actually been given the total amount of payments that we're waiting to be paid. I can't see that in the report. Do you know that number? How many millions it is?
Total, in the report, you will see the rates, and then at the further down, it shows the debtors. So that actually shows it by category, and that will give you page 136.
492,000.
Oh, that's a much lower number than I anticipated. If one consent is 200,000. So I don't know if that number is correct or for what year that's for.
That is for all resource consent that are currently sitting on the system now. That's obviously where it's been invoiced.
Okay. So there may be more that haven't been invoiced as yet.
If the application is still in progress, then the invoice actually doesn't get put on the system until the application has been completed and the resource consent has been issued. That's when it generates an invoice. Yeah. So, I mean, to be honest, I mean, looking at the numbers, if I look at it compared to what it was maybe a year or two ago, we're seeing a lot less coming through under 30 to 60 days than we did at that time. We just still have that chunk of aged debt. And those are those areas, as I mentioned earlier, where objections have been submitted, and it's a continuous throw of objections, and we literally have to then force it to get to the commissioner for the commissioner to give an opinion before we can then actually force payment. Yeah.
Thank you. I just had one other question, Mr. Chair. It was relating to my question earlier today about cash flow and about doubtful debt. And I think a lot of it's answered in this table on page 135 about Māori freehold land rates and analysis. My questions really relate to that new act, Māori Land Amendment Act, and how long we have that on our books before we write it off. And it talks about debt recovery action, because I know that we sell a property if they don't pay their rates, like in general title, like for a mortgagee sale, if you don't pay your rates on general title. I'm not sure what happens for recovery on Māori land debt though, and what happens internally and how much resource we're using for that or not.
Wondering if this is actually straying into a legal area. May need to refer this forward as a question for reporting back at the next meeting. We haven't got a legal report today, and maybe we can add this as a specific item into the legal report for the next meeting to address the situation, unless there's someone here, Deputy Mayor.
Additionally, it would be good to hear from staff that are working with Māori landowners in the space to hear how that's going, because I know there's a lot involved in trying to assist them in paying their rates, and we used to have a really good team that worked on that, and I'm not sure that we do in regard to Māori land.
And with the recent enactments from central government, it's throwing probably a level of uncertainty. So maybe this is an item for general education that maybe we ought to consider a workshop or as a small comment there, where we have the complete story can be presented for information, as opposed to any decision making, which is more the role of this committee. I think you raised some good questions, Councillor Foy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The reason I raise it is a risk for cash flow planning. And if we know we're not going to receive money and we're budgeting on money we're going to receive, but we're not actually going to receive it, we don't want to end up with a $30 million, of debt on our books that we've planned in our operational spending when we're never going to receive it. No normal business would ever do that. That's a huge financial risk.
This going back to my earlier comments, is the heart of the questions that the auditors will be addressing in the accounts, and us as governors need to have primary responsibility to ensure the amount we state as an asset is collectible is actually a realistic estimate. So I think we should probably look to get some clarity on this before the close of this year's financial statements, given the changes in the legislative environment also. There's no other questions. Couple of comments there. From my experience on other councils, that you're not alone in these issues and collecting, and just noting that on the general role there is certainly the Leonova rates. Other councils are outsourcing their collection to there's a group of councils that have got together with a debt collection process to try and streamline it. Whether that's right or wrong is really a decision of this council. Often it is better if local people are talking to the people, is my view on life with that, and therefore there can be some empathy in the situation, because these are not your usual times that we're experiencing. There's a lot of pressure going on the community, and I can only see that increasing over the next 18 months. Councillor Foy, further comment before we move to the vote?
Yes, it was just one last question about revenue recovery. So currently we invoice for the rates for the Northland Regional Council as well, and I'm not sure how that interrelates with revenue recovery, because if, for example, a councillor moves a notice of motion to stop doing that and to stop having the Northland Regional Council's rates on our rates invoices, I don't know how that interrelates with the revenue recovery, or if they collect their own revenue if we do that on their behalf. I don't know how that interrelates.
Through the chair, we have a rating agreement with Northland Regional Council, as does Whangarei and Kaipara. That runs from the 1st of July each year, so it's about to be signed for the next year. We would have to give at least 6 months' notice of our intention to withdraw from that agreement if that was the case. It would then put us at odds with the other two councils in how the regional councils' rates are collected. They do pay us for that service, so we do get income from them for carrying out that service on their behalf. And when it comes to debt collection, there's no difference between how we'd approach it with that rate included or not. It's the same process. We just name them on our recovery action as a second party.
May I ask a question just on clarification relating back to Councillor Foy's comments on cash flow? Do we pay the rates forward to the Northland Regional Council on an as collected basis, or do we effectively finance our overdue debt?
We do a reconciliation after each quarter's payment, and we pay them the cash we have collected.
So it's as collected.
So they are carrying bad debt the same as we are.
Yeah, so we're not financing.
We're not financing theirs. They're not getting all of their money, and we're holding them.
This is consistent. I'm on another regional council and on a unitary authority, and that answer is consistent with practice that I see.
Yeah, just a comment. I think it might be appropriate to get some clarity on that, especially going forward with Three Waters as well, because we might be collecting on behalf of Three Waters. This is where I'm in the dark. I'm not sure what they're planning, and given where we are. And one easy solution, I think Councillor Foy might go down that line, is to actually clarify on the invoice statements that it's regional council rates.
We do. They're clearly identified on rates assessments and rate invoices.
Yep.
Separately.
Take notice of it.
Well,
That's fine.
You only look at the total bill, and
it comes in an FNDC envelope, so
yeah,
That's right.
Total bottom right-hand corner syndrome.
yeah.
Otago Regional Council collects its own, for instance. I'm certainly aware of as a ratepayer down in that part of the world.
Mr. Chair, this was something that came up in our annual plan workshopping around how to cut costs and things like that. And at that point, I thought it had it sounded like we actually don't get much bang for our buck in terms of collecting regional councils' rates on their behalf, even though we do get a payment. So it looks like it's a 6 month window that would need to investigate discontinuing that service. So that's something that we actually maybe get briefed on or look further in.
And the question I would raise along this is, would your actual cost structure reduce if you did not collect the regional council rates? Would there be any difference, rather than looking at a theoretical analysis of what it costs to collect? Look at the contrary and the counter argument. Would our costs actually reduce in reality? And I'm seeing both staff members I can see shaking their heads, suggesting that really there is no additional real cost involved in collecting it, and therefore they're making a positive contribution. Just as a thought.
I think it's a political aspect as well, given that the Northern Regional Council's rates have increased 40% over the last 3 years, and people think that's us increasing their rates as Whanau District Council.
This Councillor Foy is not the environment for a political discussion. That's the council chambers. So perhaps that's something that ought to be considered for a workshopping, but being very careful, I would counsel to make sure that you have all the relevant facts in play, and that also you have a good understanding what the other council's thoughts on the topic are. It becomes very difficult if one council will and the other councils won't, from the point of view of Northern Regional Council.
I'll take it to Merrill for him.
Stephanie, kia ora, Mr. Chair, Councillor Pliskowicz here. Actually, I disagree with you. I disagree that this is not the environment for political back and forth. Actually, it is, because that's one of the greatest risks that face this council. Look, I've got one issue actually, and it's a bit of a perennial bugbear. I'm trying to ascertain, why does the Northern District Council send the rates that belong to Māori whānaus to Te Puni Kōkiri, which is the Māori Ministry of Māori Affairs? I went there for a meeting, and because I'm a councillor, they decided it was a good idea to give me about 400 invoices or bills issued to Māori whānaus. It's discriminatory employment practices. It's actually a shocker. And in this forum here, I want us to put this forward maybe for some type of motion or agenda for another hui, but we should never ever be sending rates to the Ministry of Māori Affairs. It's crazy, and I've said enough about that anyway. But I don't want us to do that, to be a situation that I'm faced with again, because I'm the councillor, Māori councillor. They think. I told them they're better off sending them to the local cemetery, because the people that owe them the rates are the people in there. So please, can we never do that again? What I did with them, I walked outside and put all 400 of them in the rubbish bin. So anyhow, that's...
Councillor, this is really a matter that ought to be taken up with Northland Regional Council.
No, this is not a regional council. This is this was an FMDC issue.
Something we'll follow up with our staff. What's the same offline?
Yeah, I think that's a process that needs to be taken offline, because there appears to be potentially error in the database, or because this will be an automated process, I assume, of sending of the bills. So there must be some data.
But it is a little bit crazy, don't you agree with me, that it goes to the Ministry of Māori Affairs as opposed to probably the other 50 ministries that there are government ministries? It's crazy. It's crazy. Come on, guys. It's crazy.
The bill should be addressed to the party.
It's actually it's xenophobic. It's crazy. Okay. Kia ora.
It's, I will move. I will request someone to move and second that the Te Miromiro Assurance, Risk and Finance Committee receives the Revenue Recovery Report as at 31 March 2023. Do I have a mover?
Yeah, I'll
Deputy
move it.
Stratford
Councillor.
and Councillor Radich. Second. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, if any? Carried. Now, we need to move, just get the order of these because I'm not quite right on my schedule. Item 8, a resolution to move into public excluded. Paragraph, page 137 in our papers has the recommendation and resolution. Thank you, Councillor Bushfitch.
Second.
Deputy Mayor Stratford. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against, if any? Carried. And we're back live, Fern?
We are online.
We are live. That brings us to the close of this particular meeting. If we can perhaps have the closing karakia.
Thank you very much on chairing first to Miromiro, just get one committee too. Chairman, thank you very much. Appreciate having you as a part of our council. And I'll close the
I'm enjoying being here.
Unuhia to the Tapino o Tai Wata Kama, the Tinana Tinako, Te Wairua, Naroi Te Arata Tuero, Makairi Ake, Kirunga Kia, Tina, Homie, Ye, Bye.
Bye.
Great.